So Lucinda, you want to let me know when we can start?
We are ready.
We're good. All right, I'd like to call to order the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Transit Authority Board of Directors meeting, May the 22nd, 2025, and we have a quorum. So with that, we usually do introductions first, so let's do introductions as always. Gretchen, you're normally back there, but I'm going to get you to start.
I'm Gretchen Thomas. I'm the admin assistant for TJPDC.
Okay.
I'm Ben Chambers. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Charlottesville.
I'm Ann Wall, and I serve as Deputy County Executive for Albemarle County.
Mike Pruitt, I'm an Albemarle County Supervisor representing Scottsdale.
Natalie Oshman, Charlottesville City Council.
Diantha McKeel, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
David Blunt, Deputy Director, Director of Legislative Services at TJPDC.
Christine Jacobs, Executive Director, TJPDC.
Taylor Jenkins, Director of Transportation, TJPDC.
Lucinda Shannon, TJPDC.
And because we don't have very many people usually behind us, I'll ask you to introduce yourself. Sure.
I'm Tanya Schwarzenegger, Planning Manager for Albemarle County.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Zoe Mackenberg, Transit Planner for City of Charlottesville.
Great.
Sally Duncan, Candidate for Board of Supervisors.
And when I qualified it, if we had 60 people back here, we would be. But with 3, it's okay.
And we have 2 online.
Oh, and we have 2 online. Great. Who is
We
on?
have Katie Miller and
And Taylor.
Okay.
Katie Miller. Yep.
And Taylor Jenkins. Okay, great. Welcome, guys. Can you all hear us and see us okay? I guess they can. They let us know if they can.
yeah, she can.
Okay, that's good. All right, the next item on our agenda is to accept the agenda. So I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, so there's a motion by Mike, a second by Natalie, and we need to call the roll for all of our votes according to our bylaws. So,
Counselor Pinkston, Counselor Oshrin,
Yes.
Supervisor McKeel.
yes?
Supervisor Pruitt.
All right, so we have an agenda. The next item is approval of our draft minutes from March the 27th. Does anybody find anything they wanted to point out or any edits or changes? No. If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from March the 27th.
I move to approve the March 27th minutes.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Good teamwork over here to my left. You want to call for the vote?
Counselor Oshrin,
Yes.
Supervisor McKeel,
Yes.
Supervisor Pruitt.
Aye.
All right, so we now have minutes approved. Matters from the public. Do we have anyone from the public that signed up to speak or wants to speak?
If anybody here wants to speak, you can raise your hand. And I don't think Katie.
You don't have anyone signed up?
No, we
to
don't
speak?
have anyone.
Okay, all right, so we'll move to the next item, which is non-voting directors, staff memo.
Yeah.
And Ben, you're presenting that.
Yeah, so last time we met, we talked about the non-voting directors that are allowed under the current bylaws, get up to 4 that you can invite. We talked about different agencies that you might want to invite, different nonprofits, different transit agencies you might want to invite. And at your last meeting, you asked that we give you a recommendation on how that would work because there were some issues with if we invite some, then that has implications on what happens with technical working groups and financing groups. So we put our heads together and are recommending that we bring on DRPT and UVA as 2 of the non-voting members and leaving the other 2 seats empty for now. We thought that these are the 2 most important for you to include in your discussions initially. DRPT serves on several commissions throughout the state that are with different transit and transportation authorities, and UVA is our largest employer. It's the largest institution in the region, so we may not want to give them a vote, but we do want them in the room at the table helping us make decisions about regional transportation. In order to solve sort of the tricky part of making sure that we can have transit agencies participate, we are recommending that you will put forth an amendment to the bylaws that will allow them to participate in technical committees and finance committees so that they don't have to participate on the board itself. They can participate in those committees without having that membership. So if you're interested in that, we will bring you an amendment in our next meeting that will allow you to do that.
Does the word transit agency in this context, who are you imagining that embracing? Obviously CAT, transit agency. Are we imagining Jaunt, transit agency?
Yes, John and UTS in their capacity as a transit agency. The member that we're hoping to bring as a non-voting member is not UTS. It's specifically not UTS. It is someone from the president's office or in some sort of decision-making capacity for what UVA would invest.
So we need someone at a high level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Someone who mimics in function the idea of a counselor or a supervisor.
Yes.
Yes. So we are looking for direction of a thumbs up of yes, please invite these folks to our board to be non-voting members, and also for us to go draft the amendment that would allow the transit agencies to participate.
Just curious, do you have an idea of, not that maybe the name of a person, but the department or the position that you'd be recommending for DRPT at UVA? Or do you want to just talk about that at the next meeting?
I think in our previous discussions, we've been meeting with Colette and discussing how UVA would participate, but she's retiring.
Right.
So someone from that
And from
office.
at least that level.
From that level or
Yeah.
that office, it may be whoever is replacing Colette or someone from that office who is authorized to speak
And
for
I
UVA.
imagine they're advertising it as well.
I don't think so at this
She's-
point. It's a pretty important thing. for
Yeah,
her to
and
keep involved.
Probably
July
not
1's
someone
gonna
by now.
come up fast, yeah. And how about DRPT?
DRPT, I think we'll leave it up to DRPT who they would like to.
I just
submit.
wondered if you had any idea of things like that.
I mean, I think Grant Sparks would be a great person for us to invite. Katie is also a representative to the region, so she would be a great person to have involved as well. I think it would be up to them to decide who would be the best to send to our meetings. I know they have a pretty packed agenda when it comes to the meeting schedule, so.
So you don't really need a vote on this today?
No, I think
Just
they
an
need an
agreement.
indication of
Yeah, nodding of
direction,
heads.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking for nodding of heads. Is that good? All right, then go.
How does the invitation process happen? Like, are they aware of this conversation that's happening right now?
I think DRPT is.
Well,
very
yes,
Different ask, we're gonna have to engage them from our executive offices. In the county. I know there's some county discussions that happen in those offices.
All right, so we have approval in theory at least for that. So that'll come back to us at our next meeting.
Hopefully we can come back with even
And then, that's great.
Hopefully come back with an amendment and 2 extra people with us.
That's lovely. That'd be great. All right, so we have consensus for that. Then the next item is our electronic meeting policy, which we all have to approve along the way at some point. And I guess it's an annual improvement now. So I'm going to turn this one over to you, Christine.
This is mimicking all of the other policies that you guys have already adopted on any other public body that you're on, but it serves for 2 purposes. One is for remote meetings and for all virtual participation in in-person meetings. So they're both within the same policy. The first one would permit members to participate in a meeting virtually that is being held physically in person. And the second one is for all of CARTA members to meet in an all virtual format. Both of them are contained within here. So in order for remote participation, a quorum must be physically present in a common meeting space, and the person participating remotely must note the reason. They must be able to, if they're quoting a personal reason or a personal matter, it can be limited to 2 meetings per year or 25%. Since CARTA meets 6 times per year, that's limited to 2 meetings for the year. You must note the location from which they're participating, and the board must approve their remote electronic participation. For meetings that are being held in an all virtual format, where all members are participating through electronic means, public notice must include that it's all virtual, must give public access, let them know how it is that they can participate. The public must be able to hear all members of the body, and when establishing a quorum or conducting action, the members must also be seen via the audiovisual technology. If a member is not visible or able to be seen, they are actually considered absent during that time in the meeting. We also have to provide a phone number or other live contact information so the public can notify us if we have lost audio-visual communication. If that occurs, the meeting does have to go into recess until that connection can be restored so that it can still be accessible to the public. Any materials provided to the board must be provided to the public at the same time, and then the public must be afforded the opportunity to comment as they would in other meetings if that is a part of the agenda. And then no more than 2 members of the public body can be assembled in one remote location unless it is open to the public for them also to be in that remote location to participate. And then all virtual meetings cannot occur in 2 simultaneous meetings, not simultaneous, consecutive, excuse me, and can be no more than 2 times per calendar year or 50% of the meetings. So for CARTA, 6 meetings, it can be no more than 3 meetings per year, alternating every other if that's what you all would to choose. And then finally, this policy, like you said in the beginning, does have to be adopted annually per the code.
There were some changes recently, so they're all
Incorporated.
here,
Yes,
so we're
ma'am.
good.
So staff would recommend a motion to adopt the remote meeting and all virtual meeting policy as presented.
And just let me ask quickly, are there any questions? Great. All right, then I will entertain a motion.
I'd like to move that we adopt the policy.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second from our team to my left. Will you call the vote?
Counselor Oshrin,
Yes.
Supervisor McKeel.
Yes.
Supervisor Pruitt.
Aye.
All right, so we now have adopted the electronic meeting policy. Legislative update, and David, welcome. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah,
We don't
nice
get
to see you all.
very often.
I know, yeah, see, after the General Assembly, I try to say, yeah, but, yeah, we really started to,
Can't, David. We pull them in.
we started to plug into your all's work here in the last month or 2, and I guess not only the discussions that you all had, but also within the RTP about, a path toward, getting to, some perhaps enabling legislation in the next General Assembly session to generate some revenue for transit. So we wanted to provide you with just kind of an update on some of the things that at the staff level, Charlottesville, Albemarle, as well as TJPD staff have been doing toward that end. And you have just a short 1-page memo in your packet. And if you look down to the summary part, it's really kind of 4 bulleted points that I'll just kind of expand upon a little bit. I think with me having started to plug in, and I've operated in the transit and transportation space some, but I felt like I needed to dig in a little bit. So it's been good for me, I think, to be able to have conversations with folks at the statewide level, some state agency folks, statewide association folks, catching up on some reading just to try to get a better lay of the land as far as what some of the discussions have been, what are going on right now in other parts of the state and at the state level with regard to with transportation and transit. So I've been trying to do some of that, just kind of making those outreaches. Had another one today in between meetings in Richmond. At the same time, the staff, staff of both the city and Albemarle County have been starting to look at potential revenue options. What are those revenue sources that might be candidates for seeking additional authority to be able to implement? In 2009, when the legislation was created that enabled the creation of this body, there was an accompanying bill that was not successful that would have provided for a 1-cent local sales tax by referendum, if you didn't remember that. So that, and there's probably some other options that some of the other transportation authorities are utilizing, but I believe that work is going on right now. We also are going to be developing just a little short 1 or 2-page memo. I think when we had our last meeting, we were talking about the past, the present, and the future. Something that could be an educational and awareness type document, some background about the discussions about transit and transit needs in the region up through the formation of CARTA, what's going on now with CARTA in those discussions, and then again, what is it that we're working toward in terms of being able to look at potential legislation for authorizing the generation of additional revenue for that. I think that would be a good piece to have, not only for kind of like the conversations that I've already been able to have, but any future conversations or ongoing conversations with other stakeholders and other entities at the statewide level or other regions that may be having some similar conversations as you are here, but then also certainly with state legislators. So we've also made an outreach with the 3 legislators that represent Charlottesville and Albemarle, so Senator Deeds, Delegate Cawson, and Delegate Laufer, to see if we can get an audience with them. Again, I think Senator Deeds been around, so probably knows the history somewhat better. But really just make sure that everybody is aware of kind of the work that's been going on, both within the RTP and forming CARTA, what we're talking about now, and what we're looking to do in the coming months. So I think it's probably also important in those discussions to be able to receive feedback from them. They're talking to their colleagues in the legislature and other policymakers all the time. What are they hearing? What are the possibilities? Is there momentum in certain areas? Who might be other folks that they would recommend that we reach out to, that we have conversations with? Just kind of maybe really kind of helping as we move through the next 6 to 7 months, helping to chart that path toward the 2026 General Assembly. So with that, glad to take any questions that you all might have.
Questions from anybody? Questions? I would just add that we invited, and I can't remember now, Christine, you may remember, a few years ago, Creed Deeds, and at that time Sally Hudson, and they came to a meeting and we talked about, we were looking towards an authority, so Creed certainly is aware of it, but it's been a while now since we.
And he was the Delegate Toscano carried the bills back in 2009. Creed was a co-patron on the authority bill. Delegate Toscano went alone on the revenue piece.
Yeah.
So,
Do you get the sense that we've talked about this before, how sometimes we look at sales taxes as the place to put our request for new authority for the General Assembly, just because that's where the momentum is, right? It's the thing that people have already been thinking about. And so much of this is about snagging momentum. Do you get the impression that, it's 2009, is there any sense that is there any continued momentum behind sales tax as a preferred method of funding, or is this much more kind of tabula rasa?
Yeah, I may defer to some of the other folks here in terms of the other, like the transportation authorities where sales tax was a part of some of those other revenue authorities. So if it is something that the General Assembly has seen before and they may be familiar with it, then that probably helps the cause. Quite frankly, I think the 2009 legislation had more to do about politics defeating that than anything else, including what the source was of revenue. So I think it'd be important to see what the what kind of information is generated from the staffs at the county and the city to so what they would generate and how feasible it might be.
and you all are looking at models
Yes, so
that are out
we
there.
have engaged staff at city and county sort of independently at this point and are about to organize them meeting together, but we introduced CARTA into the concept behind it, so they understand what we're trying to do here, and have started to grapple internally with, okay, what do we think is feasible for our residents here? We had that conversation just this past week, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind, but I think looking at what all the other agencies have done, it's been a mix of things. It hasn't just been, going after sales tax. It's been wholesale tax. It's been recordation taxes. It's been a whole
And
slew
you
of
can
things.
layer them, I think. You don't have to just have one.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And, there have been other taxing abilities that we have asked for in our legislative packet in the region previously for land use value taxes. That's been a thing that's come up that has not shown up in other agencies. So maybe that's an opportunity. Maybe there's an opportunity to do some sort of tax increment financing that somebody hasn't done in another agency. There are a lot of different tools for transit financing that we can have at our disposal that aren't just limited to what people have done before. So
I remember Ben sharing an article, and a year ago, or a year and a half ago, it was interesting because one of the counties, or localities, and I don't even remember if it was in the state of Virginia, if it was in Maryland or there, I thought it was fascinating that one of their funding sources were Airbnbs. Remember that,
I
Ann?
do.
We talked
I'm
about
gonna
it.
go back and look and see. If
I need to pull up that article again too. I thought that was very
Like
interesting.
the transient occupancy.
Airbnbs.
Just Airbnb.
Just Airbnb.
They were
Interesting.
putting a tax on
Wow,
Airbnbs,
okay.
which in a way, I like it when people from out of our community are paying, for some of our services.
One of the bits of feedback that we did get in our discussion this week was kind of full when it comes to hotel tax. So when it
This
comes
is
to.
not a hotel.
Right, so
This
if we're
is Airbnb.
more specific.
This was
yeah.
specifically Airbnb. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking, there are also like existing tax. We always want to be thinking about kind of the wrong pockets problem, right? Like, are we creating a saving that we're not realizing? Or like a recordation tax, this gets brought up sometimes. We can't do a recordation tax, not because we can't do a recordation tax, but because that's robbing Peter to pay Paul, because we have a recordation tax that we use, right? I wonder if you think this is something we can get away with doing though, to the state, robbing Peter to pay Paul for a tax that already exists for the state. What I'm thinking are like, for the entire coverage area, there are court fees, there are fines related to traffic. There's a lot of them, right? And those go via like pretty arcane split-wise decisions to a lot of different things. A small amount of them to the local clerk and court system, but a bunch to a bunch of different state funds, right? How jealously do those things get guarded at the state level versus how much could we swoop in and be like, actually, what if we get 60% of every traffic ticket we issue?
That might be a good question for the attorneys.
Yeah.
To see how you could navigate the
Legally
different
do
sections of the
that.
state code, and then I think you'd have to think about it in terms of, any kind of a change like that. Would it be statewide? Probably not a non-starter, and I don't even know that it would be a starter for just a couple of individual localities. But interesting thought.
There is a similar thing that happens with some of the other authorities around the state with the wholesale fuel tax, where they are robbing Peter to pay Paul, but they're
That's
using
part of what I was thinking.
But they're using it to basically jump to the head of the line with smart scale projects, and they're using that state funding to supplement their local funding ahead of time to buy down those smart scale matching requirements. That isn't really gonna help us here, because we're not talking about smart scale, we're talking about transit.
Right.
Which, smart scale can fund some capital improvements, but that's really not where the whole ballgame is for us.
I guess I might just start to generally think about existing revenue streams that are captured at the state level that might be redirectable. People are already doing that. That's already the way localities approach this problem.
Like a statewide tip where we're the small area instead of
Yes.
we're the neighborhood version of that. Kind of.
And I would push back a little bit about the hotels, because I know the hotels would not like that, because I was talking about Airbnb specifically, we mentioned hotels. Having said that, I can't tell you how often I go to a place and I have a list that I pay that's this long, right, that's aside from, and you all know what I'm talking about, so.
I do want to point out that our goal with CARTA was always to generate revenue
Right.
to support transit. And how we start isn't how we finish. And so if we can, we might need to think about the inventory of the fees that might be available or the taxes that might be available, but we might want to sort of simplify the approach to begin with, to sort of get our foot in the door. And I lean on David a little bit for sort of his thoughts on that, but with the idea that we overcomplicating it may not serve us well versus deciding that we're going to put our foot in the door, we're going to get that first bit of revenue, we're going to find that project that is impactful to the community, we're going to demonstrate that we can do this, and then the next time we have another project, maybe the spigot opens a little bit more and there's a little additional revenue that we can go in. It's always good to evaluate what's out there.
Right.
We we might want to not just do, at risk of adding one more metaphor and all of that, we don't want to bite off more than we can chew.
Well, and you're talking about low-hanging fruit and getting something successful off the ground to get it done that's meaningful, and then go from there. Yeah.
Something that you brought up in the meeting last week or the week before was similar to what Ann was just saying. We don't want to overcomplicate this, and if we can make this super simple and just say, we have enabling authority to do some sort of tax.
Yeah.
And not talk about like, we're doing this specific tax or we're doing this specific tax to this degree. If we can leave it open-ended, we want to leave it as open-ended as we can. Because that lets us do the low-hanging fruit at first while we're first getting our feet under us, but then as we scale up, we don't have to go back a second time and ask for permission. We've already got the permission to do what we need to do.
Yeah, I think that would be something definitely worth discussing, because I said earlier, the previous one was very specific to sales tax, and there was a referendum requirement, so you have to think about, that wording and, how difficult or not, it may be easy to put that on a ballot and see success.
I don't want to dispute the kind of logic of and the wisdom of let's not overcomplicate the first funding round so that we can demonstrate our quality. I just would also suggest, I don't like that sometimes as government we are a little too cavalier about our funding sources and not thinking very critically about what the impact that is on the community in it. From like a regressive versus progressive perspective, right? A sales tax is the most progressive way we can raise money. We have a more progressive way of raising money for CARTA already, right? And that is just, we all contribute from our general fund and increase property tax. That is a better way to do it than a sales tax. It's maybe less popular, but it's actually normatively better for the community. And so, like between those alternatives, if the only thing we're looking at is a sales tax, then we need to have a different conversation.
And I like the idea of only tourists pay a little bit of it, to be perfectly honest. Just because, having said that. So when Danny was here before, remember the chart that he had? He gave us some information on what other localities were doing.
Yeah, both the governance study did that analysis as well, looking at all the existing authorities, and then also some other comparable regional bodies in other states, and looking at what all their revenue sources were. And then Danny did it, a more recent version of even some of the ones that aren't formal authorities, but maybe like coalitions of transit that are receiving funds. So he did that as well, provided that.
And that's been very helpful for our teams as well, because that they've been able to go and sort of think about what those revenues look like and how that might work locally.
So next steps then, what are, so Dave?
I think, we can be certainly prepared. I don't know if there's some, you'll meet every other month, maybe there's kind of a standing update or when necessary to update you all as far as the activities or the informal conversations about, where we are or where we need board members to plug in to conversations and that type of thing. I mean, I'm assuming we would make that 1 to 2 page memo, educational piece available for you all to use as well. And conversations that you would be having.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, but I think we're continuing to talk in the working group, at every meeting, just about what we are doing from the legislative standpoint and what we need to do.
And I would say a one-pager would be great. Yeah.
And maybe also there might be some additional conversations that we could bring back some of that information to share. Maybe you just said that. Did you just say that? No.
Not as directly.
Okay.
No. When he said earlier, part of this is outreach to them to educate, but it's also a listening tour of hearing what some of the temperature of the sector is right now. Can also bring some of that feedback back.
And I think it's important to have, the ongoing communications because, what you may hear 2 months ago and now may not be the same 2 months from now, in terms of what people are hearing or, certainly, depending on what happens in November will probably, influence the conversation as well, so.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere, we've been talking about how the prediction was that the next session was going to be about transportation. And then I read an article not too long ago somewhere, and I can't remember, that they're backing off from that.
Well, I think
That's
there's,
true.
I mean, I think there's different needs that I'm hearing about in the conversations I've been having in different parts of the state. Particularly Northern Virginia, no surprise, and there's a legislative study that's primarily addressing WMATA, but other, transportation needs in that area. There's this DMV Moves, which is the COG, Council of Governments effort up there, which is looking at some broader things as well. Hampton Roads had some legislation this past year, including focused on transit, was not successful, wrong timing for them. So it may depend on where other legislation has come from. We were talking in our last meeting about some of those other past efforts and discussions that are going on now, and maybe what we would see from other parts of the state next session, are going to maybe be focused on more funding for them. Whereas we're not asking for funding if we're going to move forward with a request for authority. We're asking for the authority to generate revenue. So. Different discussion, I think, particularly with the uncertainties that, we may see in the next 8 months with regard to the state budget.
Well, in regards, I would just say with the election in November, I mean, we have a governor who said, I'm not even going to give you permission to ask your citizens, so there are challenges. Anyway.
I think there are some other regions that are talking about similar things that we're talking about, and also thinking about what their timeline looks like. And a few of them are starting to reconsider whether they want to be in that 26 window or if they still need to talk more and go into 27. I know Fredericksburg is probably going to be pushing it off until 27.
Interesting.
And I know you all had some conversation previously about, a comprehensive package. That, it may be that comes together, it may not be, but I think if the opportunity, if we're positioned to, want to jump onto something and the opportunity is there, you should be prepared to do that. But I think it's also, particularly if things that are moving elsewhere are more funding related and your authority related, to be prepared to go on your own with legislation.
That makes sense. Any other comments? So really, this was information.
Yeah.
And you all are going to be coming back to us at some point with more information.
It's ongoing.
Actually, I do have a question. This might be evident in some paperwork we have somewhere, but for the raising revenue of it all, does the existing legislation preclude us from charging a fare, or are we allowed to do that?
The legislation wouldn't speak to fares because it's not yet speaking to us being an operator. Right, yeah, so
I didn't know where the revenue line was drawn, like, is it
the legislation right now
taxation?
does not give us permission, it doesn't give us the authority to generate a revenue. That's what we would be going to the General Assembly for, is that authority.
There were separate pieces of
That was
legislation
three
previously.
different issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One was the authority piece, the other was the revenue piece.
Well, if you go on that one then?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're moving on to I believe, item 6, prioritization and implementation of feasibility studies. So, and this is the draft of the scope.
Yes. So in January, TJPDC applied to DRPT for a technical assistance grant for this project on behalf of CARTA. Last month, the draft SIP document was released by DRPT, and it's currently included as a recommendation for funding. And so the CTV will vote to finalize the 6-year improvement plan at their next meeting in June, but because it's recommended for funding, we are going ahead to make sure we're prepared to kick off on July 1. And so in your packet is a draft scope document, just a little bit about what this study intends to do. Using the Regional Transit Vision Plan, the project will further evaluate the transit services that were included in the unconstrained and the constrained networks to develop a prioritized list of recommended transit services. The Transit Vision Plan obviously had a lot of public engagement, a lot of community buy-in to it, but it gave us lump sums for both the unconstrained and the constrained network. So this project would seek to pull those out and give us individual costs for operations and costs for capital for operating all of those. and then prioritizing short-term, medium-term, and long-term implementation for those. We applied for $200,000 total. There was a 50% match requirement, and half of that came from Charlottesville, half came from Albemarle for the match. Most of that will go out to a consultant for the project, but the TJPDC will retain some of that for administrative costs, for invoicing and things like that for project management. But we wanted to put this in front of you all today just to kind of get any initial feedback or answer any questions that you all have before we get back together as staff to finalize it.
All right, so open it up for questions.
I think one of the benefits of this prioritization, there's really two in my mind, is that we're working simultaneously with any legislative effort so that we can continue the momentum of this body and we can start looking at what are the things top of mind that we want. What is that low-hanging fruit? What do we want to implement first? What are the improvements to transit? So if we're not given that authority, we are still locally making decisions with funding around what those priorities are. I think that's one. I think the second, though, is also to have that prioritized list when we're asking for authority. It's to say, in order to accomplish these things that we have already laid out as priorities, we've done all of the engagement, we've done what we can with our local dollars. So it gives us a lot of tools to go through this process.
As part of our discussion with the finance, internally, we're also saying, this is the process that's happening in parallel with your conversations. So we need you to help us understand what the appetite for funding is for this so that we understand how much money do we have to budget for when we're talking about prioritization. And vice versa, it's also an iterative process of, hey, these are all of the priorities that we're pointing out, all of the demands, and all of the things that we could be fulfilling to make transit better. Do we have the money to do that? What would it take to do that? That's sort of the feedback loop that both sides of the coin need to be able to consider, so that when we go to the legislature, we can say, we've considered both of these things. We know what we're trying to buy, and we know how much it costs. And we've done the collaboration between the city and the county that proves that we actually mean what we're going to go forward with. So it's all going to be wrapped up into the same process. This last agenda item and the current agenda item, they're separate on our agenda. They're two different processes, but they're kind of the same process.
Yeah. It looked like to me it's about a little bit less than 2 years.
Yes.
So not going to happen overnight.
No.
It's a sort of phased approach, so we should have sort of a bigger picture idea of what our priorities are earlier than 2 years, so we can sort of have that informed discussion about finance. But then the second phase of it sort of gets into more detail about what are the specific projects that we are paying for, not sort of looking at things at the corridor level, but specifically like what service improvements are we talking about.
Right.
And looking at them in comparison to the existing transit development plan and transit strategic plan of the transit agencies.
And how they all work together. Yeah.
And I believe that, the most recent Transportation Authority legislation was for Central Virginia. And I understand that they came in with a very well-done list of priorities and projects, and that was very key, to exactly what Ben had said, is being able to show we've done the work, we've identified what's most important, this is the revenue.
So when you say Central Virginia, you mean Richmond or?
Yes.
CDTA?
CDTA.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Really helpful.
So looking at that one is obviously exactly what they've done.
Yeah, and I think, they were certainly broader in terms of the, member jurisdictions. So I think they were also had some good foresight to, kind of make sure that there was a win for everybody, in terms of either a piece of revenue that they were able to get, or it's like, here's that low-hanging fruit project. Maybe it's a regional project.
They had a regional project.
Yeah, the whole line.
Also a low-hanging fruit
Exactly,
project, and
yeah.
it was a regional trail.
The trail,
that
right.
they were building out.
So
That
that
was one of the big investments.
And that was their first win
Yeah.
coming out of it.
Well, same thing when we have a referendum for schools. We make sure that every school is touched somehow or another, so that those populations, it's important, yeah. That's really.
But this grant and this study will be really helpful as we embark on this, our path for transit and transit improvements, because the grant allows us to do this study that will say, these are the top priorities, this is where we need to go.
We're sharing this with you now in part because, as Taylor said, we want to get kicked off by July 1. We won't have those consultants and that DRPT money in our pocket by July 1. So some of this is our staff moving this work forward before we get that money because we know that it is urgent and we need to get it done.
Yeah.
And that CTB meeting is when in June?
It is June 17th.
Okay.
I think it's the workshop, and action is the next day typically.
That'd be great. Really want this grant.
Commonwealth Transportation Board meetings, what you're talking about, just everything. Consultants. So we use a lot of consultants. I'm just interested in who do well, what consultants that we are aware of. I'm just curious.
The fastest way for us to access a consultant that is going to be able to support us on this grant is to be able to go through DRPTs on call. They've already done the RFP.
So, and that's right, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So we can look at who they have on staff and who we think is going to be best to support us. If there are other on-calls that TJPDC uses or that the city or the county use to have better consultants that we think will work better, we would use that obviously, but the easiest thing is to just pull off the DRP.
Yeah, because you don't have to, yeah, I get that. Having said that, the consultant will be coming back to this group, I assume, making presentations. And we have had consultants that the technology and where they are and their technology is so bad. I'm just saying, we need to make sure when we have those, I don't know how you do it, you guys work the magic, but it's really frustrating to have a consultant in Timbuktu giving us a presentation and we can't hear them, we can't understand them, their technology is bad, their connection is bad. Somehow or another, we need to write that into the, you have to. I'm just saying.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can make
Because
it
we're paying these people.
Yeah.
And if they can't produce good technology, then y'all go on it, drive down here and present to us in person. Because it's really frustrating. And we've all been there. Multiple times with trains and transportation.
Ask that they be in person.
I'm just saying.
For me, it was more, I'm less concerned about when they're not physically here than when they very clearly have not ever been here, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yes, that's a good.
I'm thinking,
I agree with that too, yeah.
they're not in the room with me and they're never going to hear this. I'm thinking the consultant we had assisting in the cell tower ordinance bill,
Right.
which I found deeply unhappy and not very well informed on the legal
Well,
concerns.
it's the same thing with staff. If you're gonna bring, for our own staffs, if you're gonna bring us a proposal and talk about something, I anticipate that you've at least been there and driven it and looked at it. It's no different, right? So, yeah, but the technology in this room at times with consultants has been appallingly bad. I'm just saying. Something to keep in mind. Yeah. I see the audience of that, okay, that's great. Anything else that you all?
We felt the same.
I don't want to belabor that, but it's just so frustrating. Anything else you want us to point out to us, or anything
No.
that you want us to ask for? Anything else?
Just putting it in front of you so you can
It
see.
made sense to me, and I thought it looked good. It looked like to me you had identified the right players, so.
Great.
I don't know if you all knew, but- All right, Taylor, well. So, I think we have come to other business updates and reminders, and I don't have any updates or reminders. Christine, I don't do
Nope.
it, not that I know of, okay, she's shaking her head.
No, we're okay.
And I like to say, I know that you're not gonna want to stay, not get out early. But hearing no objections, then I will adjourn us to our next meeting on July the 24th. And, of course, we will rally around next month for the partnership meeting. Right. So everybody is aware, right?
What's the date of that partnership meeting?
It's the fourth Thursday.
June 26th.
So we should know then about the grant.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, everybody enjoy the extra time you've got.
If anybody wants to join, there's a bike share happening in Harvard at 6.
Oh, fun.
You don't need a bike, they're just gonna show you how to do stuff on the telephone.
What was that? I missed it.
Bike repair.
Bike